Hello and welcome to the screencast. I'm Kirk Hendershot Kreitzer in the Department of Humanities at Olivet College, and this is an introduction to reading graphic narratives. The reason I'm doing this is I'm teaching a class in which we're using a graphic novel, Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, as one of our primary texts. And some of my students in the past have said that they needed help understanding graphic novels because they weren't used to reading them. They didn't grow up reading comics or graphic novels, and so the medium was giving them some difficulty. So I developed this screencast to kind of help those people out, and then hopefully other people can find it of use as well. Primarily, I'm going to be using Frank Miller's Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, as my set of examples in this text, because that's what the class is using, but I am going to include reference to other texts as well. So, that's it for the introduction. Let's get going and see what we can learn. Here's what we're talking about today. We're going to begin with a review of some kind of basic concepts, a graphic narrative, graphic novel, and comics, and which ones we're talking about and why we're talking about them. Then we're going to move on to icons, panels and borders and bleeds, gutters, splashes, and insets, different kinds of balloons that you can find in a graphic narrative, lettering, sound effects, and how to move around a page, how to follow the flow of a page so you can get the most out of the thing. Before we get into that, we should talk about why I'm using the term graphic narrative when the title of this presentation is Reading Graphic Novels, and the presentation is designed to help people who are reading graphic novels. I'm using graphic narrative because it encompasses a range of forms, including comic strips, comic books, graphic novels, tapestries, manga, dozens of forms, really. Graphic novel is accurate, but what I'm talking about can be applied to a number of other things as well, and so I'm going to be using graphic narrative as my term. One thing you might be wondering, just looking at this thing, is what's the difference between, for example, a comic book, you can see one here with the Wonder Woman cover, and a graphic novel from Hell, which is just to the right of it. Graphic novels are different from comics because comics are serialized, whereas graphic novels are standalone. You buy the thing complete and whole rather than coming out over a series of months and years. So what is a graphic narrative? A graphic narrative is a graphic work in the medium of comics, which seems really clear until you're like, okay, what is a comic? A comic is juxtaposed pictorial and other images in deliberate sequence, intended to convey information and or produce an aesthetic response in the viewer. Okay, great. What does that mean? Juxtaposed pictorial and other images. Different images can be hand-drawn, can be collaged in things that are taken from the world, found objects basically, and they're put next to each other. That's what juxtaposition is setting different elements directly against each other. Sometimes very contrasting or apparently contradictory elements. Placed in deliberate sequence means they're put in an order on purpose rather than just randomly. It can seem random, but there is often a very subtle ordering pattern that once you learn how to read is usually pretty clear. Sometimes it can get jumbled up or kind of muddled, but for the most part, it's going to be relatively easy to follow the sequence across the page. Particularly when you're dealing with contradictory elements. That's part of the deliberation, is one element sets against another to create a kind of an ironic tension or to help readers see a connection that they might not notice otherwise. They're intended to convey information, which means they want you to learn something, whether it's like a lesson or simply like, cognitive elements. Now I learned this thing about Batman, or now I learned this thing about mice, or about Anya's ghost, or about V in V for Vendetta, and or produce an aesthetic response in the viewer. They want you not only to have to learn things, but to have a response to the art. Could be it's beautiful, I love it, or ooh, that's an ugly image, and it kind of contrasts with the elegant ideas to create an ironic tension, or beautiful images to communicate beautiful things, or ugly images to communicate ugly things. And sometimes it's just they want a pure emotional response of revulsion or pleasure. So you need to know what a comic is in order to understand a graphic narrative. And really all a graphic narrative is simply a story using the medium of comics. So where do we start? We start with the most obvious and immediately recognizable element of graphic narratives, which is the images. So what do you call these things? You call them icons. An icon is any image used to represent a person, place, thing, or idea. So an icon can be a lot of different things. So here we are looking at a cover spread from Moon Knight #1. So first we have Moon Knight's cape. We have a sword. We have a ledge. We have the pirate guy. We have the pirate guy's hand. We have the moon. And we have Moon Knight himself. These are all icons. The pirate guy is an icon, but the parts of the pirate guy are an icon. And the thing he's holding is an icon. Moon Knight is an icon, but the thing he's wearing, his cape, is an icon. So is his cowl. Even if you look at his face, the little kind of slitty moon eyes, little thumbnail moon eyes, are themselves icons of eyes. So everything in a panel that you are looking at is an icon. And an individual icon can be broken down into its component parts. How do you arrange icons? You arrange them or you contain them within panels. A panel is one still image in a sequence of juxtaposed images. They're moments in time, like a photograph or a single frame from a movie. Here, this is page 4 from The Dark Knight Returns. You can see there are 9 panels. The 8 of them arranged in 2 rows across the top, and then the larger one down at the bottom. I'm pointing specifically at 4 of them right now. 2 in the top row, 1 in the second row, and then the big one down in the bottom. Before we go on, I want to point something out about panels beyond the fact that they exist. If you look at the bottom panel, the one with the guy in the suit, that's Bruce Wayne, by the way, and the street guy with the sign kind of off to his left, our right. This panel contains a lot of information. Bruce isn't the only thing going on, although he's the main character. There's the homeless guy, who doesn't look like he's doing too well. There's his sign that says, "We are damned." There's another homeless guy with a "We are damned" sign kind of behind Bruce. You can kind of see him below his left elbow there. Crossing Bruce's legs right at the knee is a kind of white ribbon which suggests smoke or steam. It's some kind of atmospheric effect. I assume pollution, given the kind of way that Gotham is presented in this graphic novel. There's also litter. If you look right at the bottom of the panel, there are these little white bits of paper flipping around. All of these things together help to communicate a sense of Gotham as dirty, kind of run down, maybe dangerous, and certainly not the nicest place to live. Other than the words on the signs, there are no words in this panel. The panel communicates visually, and so one of the things you have to do when you're reading the graphic novel is you're certainly reading what the characters say, but you're also reading the pictures for their information because they contain a lot of detail. Just like a movie can communicate a ton of things without ever saying an actual word. And in fact, the concept of pure cinema says that you don't need words in order to have an effective movie. You can see this in some of the kind of new generation of TV shows. Older generation TV shows were very dialogue heavy. Newer ones, a good example would be Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones or the reimagining of Battlestar Galactica or Outlander. A lot of their narrative comes through the visuals that you're looking at. That's a major factor of graphic novels that you need to keep in mind. Okay, back to panels. Most panels are going to have some kind of border, which is often a black line. The ones you see here are rectangular or square, though borders can be any shape at all. The heaviness or weight of the line that surrounds the border can vary hugely from page to page and from text to text. They also can change color. Generally, they're going to be black, but you can find them in other colors as well. Largely, this depends on how the artist wants the reader to feel about what a particular panel depicts, or what the emotional or intellectual content of the panel is, and sometimes both of those things. Sometimes a panel will run right out to the edge of the page, as you can see here at the left and bottom corners, bottom edges of the bottommost panel. These two edges that the lines are pointing to are what are called bleeds. That's the image that runs all the way out to the edge of the page. So this panel has two borders and two bleeds. Gutters are the space in between individual panels, and I've got a number of them indicated here. There are gutters actually all over the place in a comic or a graphic narrative. Just like with borders, these can be any size, any shape, depending on the shape of the border. These are pretty tight. They can be tighter, or they can be wider. And you can see some of them, like for example in the middle of the page where there's some narrative going on, are actually bigger to accommodate the narrative. Others are fairly consistent in their spacing. Gutters are extremely open in what they signify. Some can be a larger simply because they need to accommodate more text. Some can be narrower, like I said, but the thing to remember is that they work almost in the way, on this page anyway, that cuts do in a film, linking together a series of shots that would make up an unbroken temporal sequence. So in a movie, you would just be seeing this rolling straight through. Here, it's like there are cuts. So, for example, along the top row, you have Bruce, slightly high angle, looking down on him, walking with his tie being blowing. And then there's a cut to his feet, walking with little bits of litter flying by. And then there's a cut to him in profile, closer than the first shot of him, and then there's a cut again to a high angle. So you get the sense of him walking along as he's thinking. Gutters can signify jumps in time as well as simply like edits between shots, like in a film. You have to kind of read the gutters and read what's going on in the panels in order to understand the transitions. And sometimes it can get very complex. A gutter can signify an ellipsis, which is a little jump in time, eliminating essentially unnecessary information to get from one shot to another. They can signify a flash forward, a jump forward in time. They can signify a flash back, which is a jump back in time. And you can see an excellent example of this on this page, particularly in the lower set of panels on the bottom half of the page. If you look at the first two, you have a guy in a shower. That's Bruce in the shower. And then the third panel in shows a casing being ejected from a gun as it's being fired. And then it cuts back to Bruce's fist. And then in the next row, you see a screaming boy, and then Bruce's face in the shower, and then Bruce's face in the shower, and then an extreme close-up of pearls flying through the air. So what you're seeing is Bruce in the shower, and then he's remembering when his family, his mother and father, were killed. And then he's back in the shower, and then he's remembering again, and then he's in the shower, and then he's remembering the pearls flying through the air. So you're getting a very complex temporal sequence here of flashback. The things happened years and years and years ago, decades ago in Bruce's life. This is working the same way, again, it does in a movie, but in comics, sometimes you have to read the image to get to understand what's going on, because films will frequently signify this using other tools as well. Gutters, in addition, can be purely stylistic, breaking up a single image into individual panels, like you see at the top half of this page. And you're getting a nice stylistic contrast between the top, where the panels are bordered, but the border is essentially an invisible line. The gutter becomes the border, and then the borders at the bottom are, again, the nice, clear, sharp black lines. So you're getting essentially kind of a mirror image at the bottom, negative space and positive space, basically. This page is a good example of a major type of panel that you find in graphic narratives. The large image that fills the entire page is called a splash, which is basically a panel that has bleeds on all four sides. You can also get a splash that fills most or all of two facing pages. This is known as a double page spread. This is a single page splash. You'll see some double page spreads a little bit further on. This page also has good examples of what are called insets, which are panels inside other panels. There are three here. Insets can indicate simultaneity. They can also be temporally distinct from what's going on in the splash, happening before or after it. So again, you've got to read for the context and read the words that are going along to help you understand. Because they're panels, you can have them any shape, you can do anything you want with them. And you note the shape of these panels, these insets, they don't have to be rectilinear. These are drawn to suggest old school TV screens. Flat screen, widescreen TVs weren't a thing yet when this graphic novel was first published. So these are done deliberately to imitate the kind of old style TV tube. Now that we've looked at icons and how they are presented on the page via panels and the things associated with panels, we need to look at the verbal element that is a part of graphic narrative. It's a silent medium. It just sits there. It's on the page. It's pretty to look at, but how do you include words? You do it with balloons and letters. There are different types of balloons. There are speech balloons, which you see in the upper left, which show what a character is saying. The tail, which is the little kind of triangle pointy thing, points towards the speaker so you can tell who's saying what. And tails can be a variety of shapes depending on how the speech balloons are laid out on the page. The artist lays out the speech balloons, and then a letterer actually goes in and writes what's going on in the actual speech act. So the speech balloon is part of the overall design of an entire page. Thought balloons, which you see in the upper right, show what a character is thinking. They're distinguished by their scalloped edges, so they look kind of like a little fluffy cloud, and their tails are made up of little bubbles. They also point towards whatever character is thinking that thought. Captions are another kind of balloon. They're usually going to be squares or rectilinear. Sometimes they can be simply put inside a gutter, like you saw in one of the previous screens. They can show a wide variety of things, but in the main, you're going to find that they contain narration in the sense of characters' internal monologue, what they're thinking. So sometimes a character will be narrating his own narrative, and you get this a lot, actually, in The Dark Knight Returns. Or narration from a narrator, a separate entity or consciousness who's telling the story that you are reading. Sometimes you'll get straight-up temporal indicators or transition notes, like the one you see here in the lower left, to be continued. In the lower right, you'll see that just like the borders of panels can be any shape, so can the shapes of balloons. Artists will often use these shapes to communicate the emotional content of a particular speech act, and you can see that example here. Is the jaggy edges. It's angry, it's excited, it's all worked up. So now that we've kind of looked at the different types of balloons, let's have a look at some of these in action. This is a page from the graphic novel adaptation of the print novel Wool. You should read the book, by the way. It's an excellent book. In this page, you can see a variety of speech balloons. You can also see another major feature of the text element of graphic novels, which is the lettering. So I want you to look at the balloons, but I also want you to look at the lettering in the balloons. This sample is pretty straightforward. You get the characters who are talking with punctuation, so periods, question marks, and so on. But you're also getting ellipses, for example, in that tall, thin panel on the left side. The third balloon, you get ellipses after I know, and then after you're only half joking. If you look at the icons of the characters, the little silhouettes, and the stairs that they're walking up, it's clear that they're walking up the stairs. And so the character who's talking, you get the sense that she's tired. The next panel, you can see the same posture of the character who was on the left, asking to rest. And again, you're getting the ellipses to indicate kind of having you'll run out of air, and you have to kind of be breathing to catch your breath. You can also include sound effects like so you get someone who's just kind of gasping for air, not just simply tired, but kind of exhausted. In the last speech balloon on the page, so in the right column, the panel second from the bottom, you see a character yelling Marie. Marie it's got jaggies going on, which helps to indicate the emotion. And you'll notice that the letters are a different shape. They're larger and a little almost italicized. That So the shape of the balloon and the shape of the letters and the way in which they're written helps to communicate the emotional urgency of what the character is saying. So just like with icons, they can be very complex, and panels can be very complex. Speech balloons and what they contain themselves can be complex and can communicate valuable information, because you don't have, like in a print narrative, someone saying, he screamed or he yelped or she gasped. You just have the features on the page to communicate those things. This is a 2-page spread from the graphic novel Arkham Asylum. It gives you a really nice idea of the huge range of options graphic narrative artists have at their disposal as far as working these elements we're talking about. So I'm going to be talking from left to right, top and then bottom in my comments, so you can follow along. In the first 2 panels, you get another kind of speech balloon that isn't tethered to a visible speaker. There's no tail. This indicates voiceover speech, speech that's uttered by someone off screen or not visible in the panel. You also get the shapes used to communicate emotion. The exclamation points help with that, but the jaggies help to communicate the kind of urgency, kind of horrified energy that's going on. What's actually happening here is the character is watching Psycho on a TV. That's a shot from Psycho that's been drawn in here. That's Anthony Perkins' character. In the third panel, you can see a pretty radical change in speech balloons with what the Joker is saying. So you've got a normal speech balloon attached to the character on the left, but then you have the Joker's speech, which is written in red and an extremely kind of scrawly, scribbly script with no balloon around it. There's still a tail, but the color of the lettering, the shapes of the letters, and the fact that the lettering isn't even in a balloon all help to contribute to the sense that the Joker isn't normal. Maybe not even quite human, and certainly terrifying. In the fourth panel, which is a picture of Two-Face looking at his ugly side, you see that the word God is written in boldface. It's more emphatic than the other things in that speech balloon up at the top. This is super common in graphic novels, graphic comics, manga, everything that uses speech balloons, really. It's how the letterer, who is another artist who works on these things, shows a word that's getting a verbal emphasis of some sort. It's hard to write in italics, and so when a character is punching a word, giving it additional emphasis, it tends to get written in bold. You can see additional examples in the next panel. Conversation is dug in on. And then the panel after that, the last one on the right in the top row, you're all insane. That one's dug in on as well. And then in the bottom row, first panel, ridiculous gets emphasized. Further down the bottom row in the fourth panel, you get a beautiful example of another way in which lettering can be used that suggests the character is using a kind of sing-songy tone when he says, Joker, we're bored. Lettering, just like icons, just like panels, is a complex art. And again, it helps to communicate what's going on in the scene so you can hear it in your head if you let the letters help you to hear it. Since we're talking about hearing, we have to include the element of sound, which is another thing that goes on these pages. So obviously when characters are speaking, they're making sounds and they're using their voices in different ways, but then there are environmental or atmospheric sounds that sometimes the artists that create these things choose to include. Some will be very heavy, some use it more sparingly, some do not use them at all, but they're always part of the design of an entire page. And they'll frequently, just like with the lettering, use the shapes of the letters and the colors of the letters to communicate the characteristics of the sound, how loud a sound is, the intensity of sound, and so on. So here, this page from Dark Knight Returns has some nice examples. In the top panel, you've got a helicopter, and it's making its helicopter noise, whoop, 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 whoop. This carries over into the large central panel in the middle of the page. You can see the whoop, 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 whoop going on in the kind of upper left corner. But then you get another sound effect over the rotors of the helicopter, that shkow, shkow, which is the sound of the rockets being fired from the chopper. And then down and to the right from that, you get two poom pooms, which is the sound of the rocket slamming into the tower. These help you to kind of get a sense of the chaos that's going on. You've got a helicopter, you've got rocket sounds, you've got a poom poom going on, but it also indicates another really important thing about panels. Most of the panels you've been looking at so far show essentially like still shots, frames from a film. They've been fixed temporally. They're a moment in time. This big panel in the middle of the page shows time moving. Panels can do this. You can do this in a image, in a panel, in a graphic narrative. Panels do this in graphic narratives. They not only show fixed moments in time, but they show elapsed time. Because if you think about it, there's no way that you can get the shkow shkow of the rockets firing and the poom poom simultaneously. They don't happen at the same time. The poom poom happens after, but the way we read in the Western tradition is left to right, and so your eye kind of follows down and you get a sense of, okay, this is after. Logically, you know it isn't going to happen, but this is a good example of how panels can show multiple things happening over time in a single image. There's a little subtle thing going on here as well. If you look at the track the rockets take from the chopper down to the tower, sometimes graphic novel artists will use what is called zip lines to indicate motion or energy. Miller doesn't do that a lot in The Dark Knight Returns. He doesn't tend to do it in most of his graphic novel writing. But this is a kind of little example of it. The zip line basically shows movement, energy, and the direction of movement. They can be straight. There might be just one. They can be curved to indicate kind of a circular or looping movement. Just like with lettering, just like with panel shapes, the shape of a zip line, that weight, how thick and dark it is, the color of a zip line can give you an indicator of kind of what's going on with the movement. You can have like one, you can have 100 of them to get like really, really zippy, like, you know, the Flash going whipping right by. It's yet another element you kind of have to keep track of as you're looking at it. It's another way that I'm hoping you're seeing that how complex an art form the graphic novels are. Knowing all this is neat and stuff. Okay, so you understand panels, and you understand icons, and you understand lettering, and you understand that panels can show moments in time, but also can be temporally complex. So, okay, how do you follow a page? If you've never read a comic or a graphic novel, looking at a spread like this can be a little daunting, because how do you move from one image to the other and not get confused? What's the way to go? Good artists spend a lot of time thinking about how to lay their panels out, because they know how Western readers, if they're writing in the Western tradition, read. And that generally is left to right and top to bottom. So if you keep that in mind, left to right, top to bottom, you can generally follow a page along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through this complex 2-page spread, so you can see not only how to move image to image as an example, but how to move within the page. It's easy to do when you've got a page that's broken into nice, even, symmetrical panels. Then it's pretty clear. You just go across the top row, and then the second row, and then the third row, and then the fourth row. But when it gets more dynamic like this one, and this is moderately dynamic, but there are graphic novels I've seen that are much more complex. The images are much more demanding in how you navigate around them. You need to kind of know the rules. So let's go through and see how this goes. Remember the basic rule, but use your brain too. So here we're beginning in the upper left. You can see Superman kind of floating down towards Batman. You start with the first narrative box and you move down through that. So within a panel, just like within a page, you go left to right, top to bottom. So top moving down, so 1, 2, 3. From there, again, left to right, you move up to the top, and then down, and then over to the right, top, and then down. And because you've already read the larger panel, you move down to the upper balloon and then over and then down and over and down, over to the left and then down in that panel, one step to the right and then down, over to the right and down, over to the right and down. So generally you are moving left to right, top to bottom on the page, and within a panel you are moving left to right, top to bottom. And then when you finish a page, you jump to the top of the next page, and then you move down to the next panel, and then over, and then over, then down to the next panel, first balloon on the left, and then down to the one below that, and then over to the right, and then down through those, and then up to the next panel, and then over to the right again, and you finish the page. So although it's complex, you can see there's a very definite flow to this entire page. You have to think about how you're moving through one of these things. Every once in a while, an artist will muff it or do some design that's a little bit visually confusing, so you have to stop sometimes to look at it, but generally the good ones are going to help you know how to read through the thing. Okay, so there you have it. That's the guts of how graphic narratives work. There's a lot more to it, obviously, but this should, at least I hope, help you to understand A, what you're looking at, B, how to talk about what you're looking at, how to use the language, and C, how to read a page or set of pages in a graphic narrative. So to sum up, we have looked at icons. Here we've got Batman, Robin, and some laundry hanging on a line. We've looked at panels, borders, and bleeds. We've looked at gutters. We've looked at splashes. You don't see one on this page, but we've looked at those. And we've looked at insets. For example, they're the one down in the lower right-hand corner. We've looked at speech balloons, looked at narration and voiceover balloons. We've looked at lettering, including boldface, like these examples here for emphasis. And we've looked at sound effects. There aren't any examples on this page because, again, Miller doesn't tend to use a lot of them. And we've looked at how to move around a page, top to bottom, left to right. So you can see that example going on here. So even when there's a lot going on in an individual panel, you can kind of know how to move around the thing. And again, there's a very kind of, once you look at it, the flow across this page and down the page makes sense. So what I thought I would do is, now that we've looked at kind of the guts, is I take you through a little gallery of samples from some different graphic narratives, so you can get an idea of the range and creativity that is involved in this medium. This first example is from the graphic novel Beautiful Darkness. This is from Yaxin Lafon-Gabriel. This is from Persepolis. This is from Mouse. This is from New Mutants number 20. And this is from My Life as a Cat Named Sugar. And that's it. I hope you found the presentation useful, either because you're taking my class or simply because you're interested in graphic narratives. Look for additional screencasts in the future. I've got one planned that takes us through more advanced kind of theoretical concepts of graphic novels and how they work, particularly time and transitions within panels and between panels. But for now, take care, and I hope to see you soon.